The night of December 17th, 1944, was brutally cold on the road to a Wales, Belgium. A single American Jeep rumbled through the darkness, its headlights slicing through the freezing mist as it approached a checkpoint. The MPs manning it were tired but alert. Inside the Jeep sat three men in American uniforms. They looked the part, but as they were flagged down, something felt off. Their English was good, but it was stiff, like they'd learned it from a book. Their accents weren't quite right. The MPs started asking routine questions, but with a new edge to them. The men in the Jeep got visibly nervous. Then came the questions that were secretly life-forward passwords. Trivial things any American was expected to know, questions about baseball, state capitals, stuff like that. The driver, a man calling himself Private Charles W. Lawrence, blanked. His buddies going by Clarence Vanderwert and George Sensenbach were just as clueless. A quick search of their Jeep turned the MP's growing dread into full-blown alarm. Hidden under the seats were German army paybooks, a pile of foreign money, and the most damning evidence of all, their original German field gray uniforms. In that moment, the soldiers at the checkpoint realized the horrifying truth. These weren't Americans, were German soldiers. Unteroffizier Manfred Pernis, Oberfenrich Gunther Billing, and Jeff Reiter Wilhelm Schmidt. And they weren't alone. This one traffic stop blew the lid off a terrifying secret, exposing a deception so profound it would throw the entire American command into chaos and paranoia. This was the discovery of Operation Grief. To really get the sheer audacity of Operation Grief, you have to rewind to October 22, 1944, Adolf Hitler. Hiding out in his Wolf's Lair headquarters was a leader staring into the abyss. His armies were retreating all over Europe. He needed a miracle, a blow so stunning it could shatter Allied morale and maybe even split the alliance. He decided to do it again, launching a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, aimed at capturing the vital port of Antwerp and trapping 4 Allied armies. The plan was called Wacht am Rhein, or Watch on the Rhine, and it was a long shot. One German general gave it a grim 10% chance of success. But Hitler had an ace up his sleeve, a secret weapon he hoped would tilt the odds. He called in his most trusted and feared commando, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny. This guy was a legend, and not in a good way. A giant of a man with dueling scars on his face. He'd earned the title of the most dangerous man in Europe. This was the same man who'd led a wild glider raid to rescue Mussolini from a mountaintop prison and kidnapped the son of the Hungarian regent to keep Hungary in the war. If anyone could pull off a mission that sounded completely impossible, it was Skorzeny. In that October meeting, Hitler personally laid out his most secret plan yet, Operation Grief, which means Griffin. Skorzeny was to create a special brigade, Panzer Brigade, 150. It had 2 goals. First and most important was to race ahead of the German tanks and capture at least one bridge over the Meuse River before the Allies could blow it up. The entire offensive depended on it. The second goal was pure psychological warfare. Cause as much chaos as humanly possible behind enemy lines. The method? The ultimate deception. Skorzeny's men would wear captured American uniforms, drive captured American jeeps and tanks, and speak English. They were going to be a phantom army, a Trojan horse designed to turn the American war machine on itself. With just 6 weeks before the offensive, Skorzeny scrambled to build his Phantom Brigade at a training camp in Germany. The whole thing was a frantic mess. He needed men, gear, and training, all on an impossible schedule. An order went out across the entire German military for soldiers with knowledge of the English language and also the American dialect. This itself was a huge security leak and tipped off Allied intelligence that something weird was up. The response was big, but the quality wasn't. Around 2,000 to 2,500 men volunteered, but Skorzeny quickly found out most only knew a few phrases of high school English. In the end, only about 10 men were fluent enough in English and American slang to have a real chance of passing as natives. Another 350 or so could handle a basic conversation, but the vast majority couldn't speak English at all. The equipment situation was even worse. Hitler had promised whatever Skorzeny needed, but what actually arrived was almost comical. Skorzeny had asked for dozens of American tanks and jeeps. He got just 2 Sherman tanks, both in bad shape, and never saw action, a few trucks, and about 30 jeeps. Had to fake the rest. German Panther tanks were clumsily disguised as American M10 tank destroyers by welding on extra steel plates. Scorzini himself admitted the disguise would only fool very young American troops, seeing them from very far away at night. Even finding uniforms was a struggle. Many of the American uniforms they scraped together came from the Eastern Front and were either blood-stained or had POW stamped on the back. Despite all the problems, the training was intense. The small group of English-speaking commandos called Einheitsstilo drilled relentlessly. They watched American movies to perfect their accents and learned American slang. They were even taught the little things that could give them away, like how to hold a fork or tap a cigarette pack like a GI. The secrecy was absolute. One German soldier was supposedly executed just for writing home with too many details about his training. As they prepared, a rumor started to spread among the men, born out of their commander's reputation. Their real mission was to go all the way to Paris and capture or kill the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Scorzini tried to shut the rumor down, but it took on a life of its own and would soon become terrifyingly real to the Allies. On December 16, 1944, the German offensive began. 250,000 soldiers smashed into the Ardennes, catching the Allies completely off guard. In the middle of it all, the first few teams of Operation Grief slipped through the American lines. Almost immediately, strange reports started trickling back to Allied command. A road sign was flipped, sending an entire American regiment on a long detour. Communication lines were cut. Fake orders were passed down, telling units to retreat. These were small acts of sabotage, but they planted the first seeds of chaos. The real panic, though, started with the capture of Gunther Billings' team near a whale on December 17th. During interrogation, one of the captured Germans, maybe trying to sound tough or just caught up in the myth, repeated the rumor about their ultimate mission. He claimed they were part of a huge plot to get to Paris and assassinate General Eisenhower. For American intelligence, this wasn't a rumor. It was a bombshell. Combined with Scorzini's reputation, the threat felt terrifyingly real. The news shot up the chain of command, and the Allied leadership's reaction was immediate and extreme, leading to what one historian called an American overreaction bordering on paranoia. General Eisenhower, the architect of the Allied war in Europe, basically became a prisoner in his own headquarters. For several days, including over Christmas, he was confined to his office, surrounded by guards, decision that made him furious and hampered his command during a critical battle. The fake assassination plot, a total fabrication, had ironically become Operation Grief's single biggest success. This high-level panic poured down onto the soldiers on the ground, creating a tidal wave of suspicion. Roadblocks popped up everywhere, manned by jumpy MPs, who now saw every American uniform as a potential threat. A bizarre new security check was born. GIS were forced to answer trivia questions that only a real American could know. What's the capital of Illinois? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? Who won the last World Series? The system was chaos. Many real American soldiers, exhausted and stressed, couldn't remember the answers. One Brigadier General, Bruce Clark, was held at gunpoint for hours after he incorrectly said the Chicago Cubs were in the American League. Even General Omar Bradley was stopped multiple times. For about 24 to 48 hours, the American Army was partially paralyzed by its own fear, spending as much time interrogating itself as fighting the enemy. The psychological damage was far greater than any physical damage the commandos ever managed to cause. The chaos of Operation Grief shows that wars aren't just fought with bullets and tanks, but with information and fear. The story of how a few dozen men in the wrong uniforms nearly brought a modern army to a standstill is a wild lesson in military history. If you think these deep dives into the forgotten corners of World War II are fascinating, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We dig into the human stories and bizarre operations that changed the course of the war. While Operation Grief was a psychological home run, its military goals were a total bust. The main objective, capturing the Meuse bridges, failed completely. The German tanks got bogged down by fierce American resistance, and Scorzini's commandos never got the breakthrough they needed. By the second day, Scorzini knew the jig was up and ordered his brigade to fight like a regular unit. It was thrown into the brutal battle for the town of Malmedy and took heavy casualties. For the commandos who were captured, the end was swift and harsh. The three men from the Jeep Billing, Pernews, and Schmidt were tried by a military commission on December 21st. They were found guilty of espionage. Just 2 days later, on December 23, 1944, they were executed by a firing squad. In total, 18 German soldiers caught in American uniforms during the battle would face the same fate. They were shot as spies, a grim end for Hitler's Trojan horse. But the story doesn't stop there. In May 1945, the mastermind himself, Otto Skorzeny, surrendered to American forces. After 2 years in a prison camp, he was finally put on trial in August 1947 at the Dachau trials. He and 9 other officers were charged with violating the laws of war for using American uniforms. It seemed like an open and shut case. But Skorzeny had a brilliant American defense attorney, Colonel Robert Durst. Their defense relied on a very fine legal point. Skorzeny argued that he had given explicit orders that his men were not to fight while wearing American uniforms. The uniforms were for deception only and were to be taken off before any combat. He claimed this was a legitimate ruse of war, totally different from perfidy, which is fighting under a false flag. To back this up, his defense called a stunning witness, a decorated British commando named Forrest E.O. Thomas. E.O. Thomas testified that he himself had worn German uniforms to conduct operations, arguing there was no real difference between what he did and what Skorzeny's men did. The court was swayed. It drew a distinction between wearing an enemy uniform for deception and wearing it during a fight. Since the prosecution couldn't prove Skorzeny's men had actually fired on Americans while disguised, the court acquitted Skorzeny and his officers. The man who had unleashed a wave of paranoia on the Allies walked free, a shocking verdict that set a new legal precedent. By any military standard, Operation Grief was a failure. It didn't grab the bridges. It didn't change the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge, which ended in a decisive Allied victory. But the story of Operation Grief isn't really about military strategy. It's about how a simple, scary idea can be a weapon all on its own. For a few wild days in December 1944, a handful of German soldiers did what entire divisions couldn't. They shattered the trust that holds an army together. They proved that fear can be as effective as an artillery shell, and that paranoia is a saboteur hiding in plain sight. The operation became a legend of World War II, a wild cautionary tale about how even the strongest armies are vulnerable to deception. It forced soldiers to look at their own comrades and ask, "Are you really who you say you are?" The image of American MPs grilling their own generals about Mickey Mouse and baseball perfectly captures the absurdity and the terror of that moment. And in the end, Otto Skorzeny's bizarre legal victory adds one last complicated chapter to the story. His acquittal, while controversial, forced a difficult conversation about the fuzzy rules of war. Operation Grief remains a powerful reminder that the battlefield isn't just a physical place, it's also in the mind, where the most damaging wounds are sometimes the ones you can't see.